Naomi Walker had perfected the art of becoming invisible, choosing the middle seat on Flight 447's red-eye to London, her worn hoodie pulled low over eyes that hadn't truly slept in 5 years. To the chattering grandmother beside her and the stressed businessman typing furiously on her other side. She was nobody special, just another exhausted traveller trying to disappear into the anonymous comfort of economy class. But when the captain's voice cracked through the intercom with barely controlled panic, when an unidentified aircraft began stalking them through the night sky like a predator sizing up its prey, and when that dreaded question echoed through the cabin, "Is there any fighter pilot on board?" 200 passengers were about to discover that the woman they'd barely noticed boarding was their only hope for survival. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The evening sun painted long shadows across the tarmac at JFK International Airport as passengers began boarding Flight 447, a red-eye bound for London. Among the steady stream of travellers, Naomi Walker moved with deliberate slowness. Her worn jeans and oversized Northwestern University hoodie helping her blend into the crowd. At 35, she carried herself with a peculiar contradiction. Shoulders that wanted to stand at attention, but forced themselves to slouch. Eyes that scanned the boarding area with practiced precision before deliberately unfocusing. "Welcome aboard," the gate agent said cheerfully, scanning her boarding pass. Naomi offered a tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and made her way down the jet bridge. The aircraft hummed with that particular energy of pre-flight anticipation. Business travelers stowed their laptops with practiced efficiency. Families negotiated seat assignments, and the flight attendants moved through their preparations with choreographed precision. Naomi found her seat, 32B, a middle seat in economy, and settled in without complaint. Most people would have grimaced at the assignment, but she seemed almost relieved to disappear between 2 other passengers. To her left, by the window, sat Margaret Foster, a chatty woman in her 60s, wearing too much perfume and clutching a romance novel. To her right on the aisle, a businessman named David Brooks was already typing furiously on his laptop. His jaw clenched with the kind of tension that suggested this flight was one of many in an endless cycle of meetings and deadlines. "First time to London, dear?" Margaret asked, already leaning into Naomi's space with the enthusiasm of someone who viewed flights as social opportunities. "No, ma'am," Naomi replied softly, pulling her hood up and closing her eyes. Just tired, Margaret's face fell slightly, but she recovered quickly, turning to her book with a small huff. Naomi had perfected the art of polite dismissal, friendly enough not to offend, distant enough to discourage further attempts at conversation. 3 rows ahead, a family was settling in with the controlled chaos that came with travelling with children. The Andersons, Tom and Sarah, with their twins, Emma and Jacob, both 8, were already deep in negotiations about who got the window seat for takeoff. Sarah Anderson caught the eye of flight attendant, offering an apologetic smile that said, "We'll try to keep them quiet, but no promises." The flight attendants moved through their routines, but there was something different about their demeanor tonight. Jennifer Martinez, the lead flight attendant with 15 years of experience, exchanged glances with her colleague Robert Hayes as they counted passengers. They'd both noticed a group of 4 soldiers in uniform boarding earlier, heading home from deployment. The men looked exhausted, their 1,000-year stares suggesting they'd seen more than they cared to remember. One of them, Sergeant Marcus Williams, kept checking his phone, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. But it wasn't the soldiers that had caught Jennifer's attention most. It was the man in 38F who had pulled low despite the warm evening, oversized sunglasses still on, even though they'd been inside for 20 minutes. He'd barely spoken when boarding, just pointed to his seat assignment when asked. His carry-on bag had seemed unusually heavy when he lifted it into the overhead compartment, the muscles in his arms straining more than they should for what appeared to be a simple backpack. Captain James Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, his silver hair and weathered face suggesting decades of experience. At 58, he'd flown through everything from volcanic ash clouds to hurricane evacuations. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the weather reports, showing clear skies that somehow didn't match the unease in his gut. Or maybe it was just the accumulation of too many years, too many flights, too many close calls that nobody ever heard about. "Good evening, folks." His voice came over the intercom, warm and reassuring with that particular pilot drawl that suggested everything was under control. "This is your captain speaking. We're looking at a smooth flight to London tonight, about 7 hours and 20 minutes in the air. Weather's looking good, and we should have you at Heathrow right on schedule. Sit back, relax, and let us take care of you tonight." But even as he spoke, his co-pilot, First Officer Alan Peterson, was frowning at something on his radar screen. "Jim, you seeing this?" Reynolds leaned over. "What am I looking at?" "Probably nothing. Just thought I saw something at our 7 o'clock about 40 meters out. Moving fast. It's gone now." "Keep an eye on it," Reynolds said, though he kept his voice casual. "No need to worry about phantoms on the radar. Not yet." Back in 32B, Naomi had already drifted off, or at least appeared to have. Her breathing was steady, but not quite the deep rhythm of true sleep. Her fingers tucked inside her hoodie pocket, occasionally twitched, muscle memory from years of gripping something that wasn't there anymore. Margaret Foster glanced at her occasionally, something about the younger woman's stillness making her uneasy in a way she couldn't quite articulate. The plane pushed back from the gate with the usual series of mechanical sounds. The whir of the pushback tug, the initial start-up of the engines, the various clicks and hums that frequent flyers could identify with their eyes closed. The safety demonstration played on the screens, though most passengers ignored it, absorbed in their phones for those last few minutes of connection before airplane mode became mandatory. It was during the taxi to the runway that the first unusual thing happened. A loud thud echoed from the cargo hold, sharp enough to make several passengers look up from their devices. The plane was still moving, but there was a momentary pause in the flight attendants' movements. Jennifer picked up the intercom quickly. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was just some cargo shifting during our taxi. Nothing to worry about. We'll make sure everything is secure before takeoff." But she exchanged another glance with Robert. Cargo didn't usually shift during taxi. Not like that. Not with that kind of impact. The man in 38F, whose boarding pass identified him as Michael Smith, though that almost certainly wasn't his real name, shifted in his seat. His hands, which had been steady until now, showed the slightest tremor. He pulled his bag down from the overhead compartment, ostensibly to retrieve something, but his movements were too careful, too deliberate. He placed it under the seat in front of him instead of returning it overhead. As the plane lined up for takeoff, Captain Reynolds walked back through the cabin. Unusual for this stage of flight, but he played it off as a final check. His eyes moved across the passengers with practiced assessment. the soldiers exhausted but alert, the family already deep in the ritual of keeping children calm, the business travellers, the tourists, the elderly couple holding hands across the aisle. His gaze lingered on Naomi for just a moment longer than the others. Something about her posture, even in sleep, the way her feet were positioned, ready to move, the placement of her hands. He'd seen that kind of ready stillness before in people who'd been trained to go from zero to action in heartbeat. But he moved on, filing the observation away. Flight attendants prepare for takeoff, came Peterson's voice over the intercom. The engines roared to life with that distinctive building whine, pressing everyone back into their seats as Flight 447 accelerated down the runway. The nose lifted and they were airborne, New York falling away beneath them in a glittering sprawl of lights. For the first 20 minutes, everything was normal. Drink orders were taken, the seatbelt sign turned off, and passengers settled into the rhythms of a long flight. Some pulled out books, others queued up movies, and many, like Naomi, appeared asleep. But she wasn't sleeping. Behind her closed lids, her mind was running through calculations she hadn't made in years. The angle of climb, the engine performance, the subtle shifts in heading as they adjusted course. Old habits died hard, and some never died at all. They just went dormant, waiting in her half-conscious state. Memories flickered. The weight of a flight helmet, the rush of G-forces, the voice of her wingman through the radio static. She pushed them down, forced her breathing to remain steady. That was another life, another person. She was. Just Naomi Walker now, nobody special, going to London for a conference she had no intention of attending. The ticket had been an excuse to fly, to feel the familiar sensation of leaving Earth behind, even if she was just a passenger. Now, outside the window, if anyone had been looking at just the right moment, they might have seen a shadow against the clouds, something moving parallel to their course, but at a different altitude. But the Anderson twins were busy with their tablets, and Margaret Foster was absorbed in her novel, and a shadow passed unnoticed. In the cockpit, Peterson frowned at his instruments again. "Jim, I'm getting that reading again. Stronger this time." Reynolds looked over. "How far?" 20 meters and closing. Speed doesn't match any commercial traffic. Could be military. There's an exercise scheduled off the coast." "Yeah, maybe," Peterson said, but he didn't sound convinced. Military exercises were usually communicated to commercial traffic. This wasn't on any notice. The plane had been in the air for just over an hour when the first real turbulence hit. It wasn't the gentle rocking that passengers barely noticed, or even the moderate bumps that made people grip their armrests. This was sudden, violent, throwing the aircraft sideways in a motion that shouldn't have been possible in the clear skies they were flying through. Drinks spilled, overhead compartments rattled. Someone's tablet went flying into the aisle. The Andersons' daughter, Emma, let out a frightened cry, immediately soothed by her mother's practiced reassurance. But Sarah Anderson's eyes were wide as she held her children, her own fear barely contained. Naomi's eyes snapped open at the first jolt, her body instinctively adjusting to the motion. Her feet spread wider, finding purchase, her hands gripping the armrests with precise pressure. Not the white-knuckled panic of a frightened passenger, but the controlled response of someone used to unstable environments. Margaret Foster, who had grabbed Naomi's arm in fear, noticed the younger woman wasn't even breathing hard. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Reynolds' voice came over the intercom, and there was something in his tone that made even the experienced travelers pay attention. "We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts. Flight attendants, please be seated. But Reynolds knew this wasn't turbulence. Not really. The weather radar showed clear skies for hundreds of miles. The aircraft's sensors weren't detecting any wind shear or atmospheric disturbance, which meant something else had caused that jolt. Something external. In seat 38F, Michael Smith, or whatever his name really was gripping his seat so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead, and he was muttering something under his breath. The language wasn't English, though he'd spoken perfect American English when forced to interact with the crew earlier. The passenger next to him, a college student named Tyler Johnson, tried to lean away without being obvious about it. "You okay, man?" Tyler asked, though he immediately regretted drawing attention to himself. The hooded man's head snapped toward him, and for a moment Tyler saw his eyes behind those dark glasses, wide with something that looked like terror. "It's too early," the man whispered more to himself and to Tyler. "They weren't supposed to." He cut himself off, pulling his bag closer. Jennifer Martinez, strapped into her jump seat, noticed the interaction. She'd been watching that passenger since boarding, and now every instinct she'd developed over 15 years was screaming that something was very wrong. She caught Robert's eye and nodded toward 38F. He'd seen it, too. 10-year-old Jacob Anderson was pressed against the window, his face illuminated by the reading light as he stared out into the darkness. "Mum," he said, tugging on Sarah's sleeve. "Mum, there's another plane out there." "That's nice, honey." Sarah responded absently, still trying to calm his sister. "No, Mom. Really, it's really close, like really, really close." Tom Anderson leaned over his son to look out the window. For a moment, he saw nothing but stars and the faint glow of moonlight on clouds below. Then something moved across his field of vision, a dark shape against the darker sky, maybe a few 100 yards away. It was gone before he could fully process what he'd seen. "Probably just another commercial flight, buddy," he told his son, but he kept watching the window. In 32B, Naomi had noticed the child's observation. Without making it obvious, she shifted slightly to get a better angle on the windows across the aisle. Her trained eyes picked up what others might miss: the faint reflection of navigation. Lights that shouldn't be there, moving in a pattern that didn't match any standard commercial flight path. The plane jolted again, less violently this time, but with a strange rolling motion that made several passengers grab for their sick bags. This wasn't turbulence. Naomi recognized it immediately. Wake vortex, the spiral of disturbed air left behind by another aircraft. But no commercial plane should be close enough for them to hit its wake. Not at this altitude, not on this flight path. She was fully awake now, though she kept her eyes half closed, maintaining the appearance of a drowsy passenger. Her mind was running through possibilities, none of them good. The repeated jolts, the pattern of the disturbance, the nervous behavior of the passenger in 38F, pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve but couldn't help assembling. Jennifer had made a decision. Despite the seatbelt sign, she unbuckled and made her way carefully toward the cockpit, using the seats for support. As the plane continued to experience intermittent shutters, she knocked on the cockpit door. 3 short, 2 long. The code for urgent but not emergency. Reynolds opened the door slightly. "Jennifer, you should be seated. Captain, we have a passenger in 38F who's exhibiting extremely suspicious behavior and whatever's happening with the plane." He seemed to know it was coming. Reynolds' expression darkened. He glanced back at Peterson, who was still monitoring the radar. "We're being shadowed," he said quietly. "There's an aircraft following us, not responding to any communication attempts. We've tried switching frequencies, even try guard." Nothing. Jennifer's face palled. Guard frequency was the emergency channel monitored by everyone. If someone wasn't responding on guard, they either couldn't or wouldn't. "What do you want us to do?" she asked. "Keep an eye on that passenger." Quietly. "Don't cause a panic. I'm going to come back and take a look myself in a few minutes. Make it look routine." Jennifer nodded and made her way back, stopping to check on passengers as though nothing was wrong, offering reassurances about the turbulence. When she reached 38 degrees Fahrenheit, she made a point of checking the overhead compartments, getting a closer look at the hooded man. He was clutching something in his pocket, something rectangular, about the size of a phone, but thicker. Back in her seat, Naomi was watching it all unfold through barely opened eyes. She saw Jennifer's careful observation, noticed the tension in the flight attendant's shoulders, the way her professional smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She saw the hooded man's nervous movements, the way he kept checking his watch, an expensive military-style chronometer that seemed at odds with his otherwise unremarkable appearance. Another passenger had noticed the tension too. James Crawford, identified by some of the crew as an ex-cop from the way he carried himself and observed his surroundings, had shifted in his seat to get a better view of 38F. 20 years on the Chicago police force had taught him to read situations, and everything about this one was reading wrong. The plane lurched again, harder this time. Oxygen masks dropped from several compartments, dangling for a moment before automatically retracting. A malfunction that shouldn't happen without a loss of cabin pressure. Gasps filled the cabin. Someone started crying. The Anderson twins clung to their parents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Reynolds' voice came again, and this time the strain was audible. "We're experiencing some technical irregularities. Nothing to be alarmed about, but I'm going to ask everyone to remain seated with seatbelts securely fastened. We may need to adjust our altitude." But Naomi heard what he wasn't saying. Technical irregularities didn't cause oxygen masks to deploy, and adjusting altitude was pilot speak for evasive maneuvering. Whatever was following them was getting more aggressive. The hooded man suddenly stood up, ignoring the seatbelt sign, and headed toward the lavatory. Jennifer started to intercept him, but he moved with surprising speed, locking himself inside before she could reach him. She pressed her ear to the door and heard him talking. No, arguing with someone, but he was alone in there, which meant he was on a phone or radio. Crawford, the ex-cop, had seen enough. He unbuckled and moved to position himself near the lavatory, ready to act if needed. He caught Jennifer's eye and nodded. He had her back. In the cockpit, Peterson was getting increasingly agitated. "Jim, it's matching our course changes. Every adjustment we make, it mirrors within seconds. This isn't random. We're being hunted. Reynolds have been flying for 30 years. He dealt with hijacking attempts, medical emergencies, engine failures, and weather that would make most pilots consider early retirement. But this was new. This was something else entirely. "Try ATC again," he ordered. "Send a code of distress. Don't make it obvious, but let them know we have a situation." Peterson keyed the radio using subtle language that any controller would recognize as a call for help without alerting anyone who might be listening. But the response was static. Then for just a moment, a voice broke through, not air traffic control, but someone else speaking in accented English. "Flight 447. Maintain current heading and altitude." Comply and no one will be harmed. Reynolds and Peterson exchange glances. This had just gone from suspicious to confirmed hostile. Back in the cabin, Naomi had made a decision. She couldn't maintain the pretense of sleep any longer, not with the situation escalating. She opened her eyes fully, sitting up straighter, her entire demeanor shifting subtly. Margaret Foster, still clutching her romance novel like a lifeline, noticed the change immediately. "You're not really just tired, are you?" Margaret whispered, with the intuition that came from raising 4 children and knowing when someone was putting on an act. Naomi turned to her, and Margaret saw something in those eyes that made her breath catch. A depth of experience of capability that had nothing to do with attending conferences or taking vacation trips to London. "Ma'am," Naomi said quietly, "in a few minutes things might get complicated. When they do, I need you to keep your head down and follow the crew's instructions exactly. Can you do that for me?" Margaret nodded, suddenly very aware that the tired young woman in the middle seat might be the most important person on this plane. The lavatory door opened and the hooded man emerged. His face was pale, sweat soaking through his shirt. He looked around wildly, as if searching for something or someone, then locked eyes with Naomi. For a moment, recognition flickered across his features, not of her specifically, but of what she represented. The way she sat, the way she watched him, the controlled readiness in her posture. He started to back away, but Crawford was there blocking his retreat. "Sir, I think you need to return to your seat," the ex-cop said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "You don't understand," the man said, his accent now apparent. "Eastern European, maybe Russian. They're coming. They're already here. The package. They want the package." "What package?" Crawford demanded. But the man had already pushed past him, practically running back to his seat. Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, moving through the cabin with forced calm. His eyes swept across the passengers, lingering on the hooded man, on Crawford, on Jennifer, who was trying to maintain order, and finally on Naomi. Their eyes met for a moment, and he saw something there that made him pause. Recognition not of her face, but of her type. He'd flown with enough military personnel to recognize one even in civilian clothes. He made his way back to the cockpit, his mind racing. They were 2 hours from the nearest suitable airport for emergency landing. They had an unidentified aircraft shadowing them, a passenger who clearly knew more than he should, and no communication with the ground. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and he was running out of options. That's when the plane shuddered again, but this time it was different. This time everyone heard the sound. A high-pitched whine followed by a flash of light outside the windows. The shadowing aircraft had just fired a flare across their nose. A warning shot. The cabin erupted. Screams, crying, prayers in multiple languages. Parents clutched children. Strangers grabbed each other's hands. The soldiers snapped to alertness, their training kicking. And even though they were helpless in this situation, and in seat 32B, Naomi Walker closed her eyes for just a moment, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, she was no longer hiding. The mask was off, and underneath was someone who had once been Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Walker, one of the Air Force's most decorative fighter pilots, before she disappeared from service under classified circumstances. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her voice cutting through the panic with military authority. Everyone remained calm and seated. Flight crew, initiate emergency protocols. The cabin fell silent, all eyes turning to her. Captain Reynolds, watching from the cockpit door, felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Help had arrived, but from the most unexpected source. The question now was whether would be enough. The silence that followed Naomi's commanding voice lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Every eye in the cabin was fixed on her. This woman who moments ago had been just another sleeping passenger, and now stood with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Captain Reynolds moved quickly down the aisle toward her, his weathered face a mixture of desperate hope and professional skepticism. The plane shuddered again, a reminder that whatever was happening outside wasn't waiting for them to figure things out. "Ma'am," Reynolds said, his voice low enough that only those nearest could hear. "I don't know who you are, but if you have any experience, that might help." "Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Walker," she said quietly, meeting his eyes. "Former F-22 pilot, 94th Fighter Squadron, and right now, Captain, you need to tell me everything about what's happening up there." Reynolds' eyes widened slightly. He'd heard that name before, years ago, in the kind of conversations pilots had in airport bars after too many drinks. The female fighter pilot who disappeared from service after a classified incident. The one who'd supposedly outflown half the Air Force in combat exercises before vanishing from the military entirely. "We've got an unidentified aircraft shadowing us," he said quickly, not responding to any communication attempts. "They've cut us off from ATC somehow. Jamming maybe, and they just fired a warning shot." Naomi's jaw tightened. She glanced towards the window, calculating angles and distances with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent thousands of hours thinking in 3 dimensions. "How long have they been with us?" "First contact about 90 minutes ago. They've been matching our course changes perfectly." "Show me your radar readings," she said, already moving toward the cockpit. Then, louder, addressing the cabin, everyone remained seated. Flight attendants secure all loose items and prepare for possible evasive maneuvers. Jennifer Martinez, despite her fear, immediately began following the orders. There was something about Naomi's tone that brooked no argument, no hesitation. This was someone who knew what she was doing. As they reached the cockpit door, Reynolds hesitated. "I need to know, can I trust you? Your service record, the way you left." "Captain," Naomi said, her voice steady but urgent. "In about 30 seconds, that aircraft is going to make another pass. They're testing your responses, seeing how you react. Right now, I'm the only person on this plane who has any chance of understanding what they want and how to counter it. You can question my past later, but right now you need my help." Reynolds made his decision. He opened the cockpit door, ushering her inside. Peterson looked up in surprise as a passenger entered the sacred space of the flight deck. "Jim, what the hell?" "She's military fighter pilot," Reynolds said tersely. "Show her the radar." Naomi leaned over the instruments, her eyes quickly scanning the displays. Her whole demeanor had changed. Gone was any pretense of being a civilian. Her movements were precise, economical, professional. There, she pointed to a blip on the radar. "See how they're maintaining position just outside your cast range? They know exactly where your collision avoidance system's limits are. This isn't some amateur. This is someone with military training." The radio crackled to life again, the same accented voice. "Flight 447. Begin descent to flight level 180. You have 2 minutes to comply." "If we descend to 18,000 feet, Peterson began, "we'll be in perfect position for a forced landing at any number of small airfields," Naomi finished. We're low enough for mid-air boarding if they're really ambitious. Reynolds stared at her. Mid-air boarding? That's impossible. It's been done, Naomi said quietly. Twice that I know of, both times with inside help. Her eyes narrowed. That passenger in 38F, he knows something. Back in the cabin, the tension was reaching a breaking point. The hooded man, Michael Smith, or whatever his real name was, had curled into himself, clutching his bag like his life depended on it. Crawford, the ex-cop, had positioned himself where he could watch both the suspicious passenger and the cockpit door. The Anderson family was holding each other tightly. Sarah was trying to keep the twins calm, but her own fear was bleeding through. It's just like really bad turbulence, she kept saying, though nobody believed it anymore, least of all her. Sergeant Williams and his fellow soldiers, Martinez, Thompson, and Davis, had moved subtly into defensive positions without even discussing it. Their training wouldn't let them sit passive in a crisis, even if they didn't fully understand what was happening. Margaret Foster, still in her window seat, was praying quietly, her romance novel forgotten on her lap. But she kept glancing at the empty middle seat where Naomi had been, wondering who exactly she'd been sitting next to for the past 2 hours. In the cockpit, Naomi was rapidly processing information. Captain, I need you to key a radio to guard frequency, but don't say anything. Just key it for 3 seconds, then release. Then do it again, 2 short bursts. What will that do? Reynolds asked, even as he followed her instructions. If there's anyone listening, military, civilian, anyone, they'll recognize it as a distress pattern. We might not be able to talk, but we can signal. She turned to Peterson. Start a very gradual descent. Make it look like you're complying, but drag it out. Buy us time. Time for what? Peterson asked. For me to figure out what they really want, Naomi said. She looked at Reynolds. I need to talk to your suspicious passenger, the one the flight attendant mentioned. That could be dangerous. Captain, everything about this situation is dangerous, but that man knows something and we need to know what it is. Reynolds nodded slowly. Jennifer can bring him up here. No, Naomi said. Too obvious. They're watching, probably monitoring. I'll go to him, make it look routine. She started to leave the cockpit, then paused. Captain, whatever happens, don't let them force you below 15,000 feet. Above that, you still have options. Below that, she didn't finish the sentence. Naomi made her way back through the cabin, moving with a steady confidence of someone who belonged there. She stopped at several seats, appearing to check on passengers, offering calm reassurances. To anyone watching, she looked like she might be an off-duty flight attendant helping out. But her path was deliberate, designed to bring her to seat 38F without seeming obvious about it. When she reached the hooded man, she knelt in the aisle beside him, her voice low and steady. I know you're scared. I know they're coming for you. But if you don't tell me what's going on, everyone on this plane is going to pay the price for whatever you're carrying. The man's head snapped up, his eyes wide behind those dark glasses. You don't understand. You can't understand. If they get it, what is it? Naomi pressed. What are you carrying? He clutched his bag tighter. Codes, he whispered. Satellite override codes. They were supposed to be delivered quietly, but someone leaked. They found out. They're here to take them. Naomi's blood ran cold. Satellite override codes could be used to take control of military satellites, redirect them, or even crash them into other objects in orbit. In the wrong hands, they could cause catastrophic damage. Who are they? She asked. Mercenaries, former military. They call themselves the Grey Wing. Their leader, He stopped, his face paling even further. What about their leader? He used to be American Air Force. Like you, the man had noticed her bearing, her manner of speaking. They say he was one of the best pilots ever trained before he went rogue. They call him Spectre. Naomi felt the world tilt slightly. Spectre. She knew that call sign. She knew it because she'd flown with him for 3 years. Marcus Webb, her former wingman, the pilot who'd been by her side through countless missions until that final fatal operation that had ended her career and apparently begun his transformation into something else entirely. She stood slowly, her mind racing. If Marcus was out there, if he was behind this, then the situation was far worse than she'd imagined. He knew her tactics, her thinking, her weaknesses, and worse, he knew she was the type of person who would do anything to protect innocent lives. "Stay in your seat," she told the hooded man. "Don't do anything to draw attention." She made her way back toward the cockpit, but stopped when she noticed Crawford, the ex-cop, watching her intently. Their eyes met, and she made a decision. She moved to his seat, leaning down as if checking on him. "You're law enforcement." She said it wasn't a question. "Retired," Crawford replied. 20 years Chicago PD. I need your help. That man in 38 degrees Fahrenheit is carrying something that the people following us want. We need to make sure they don't get it." Crawford's eyes sharpened. "What do you need me to do?" "Watch him. If he tries to do anything, destroy the codes, communicate with someone, anything, stop him, but quietly. We can't afford to panic." "Understood." Crawford shifted slightly, improving his angle of observation. "Who are you exactly?" "Someone trying to keep us all alive," Naomi replied, already moving away. The plane lurched suddenly, harder than before. This time it wasn't turbulence or wake vortex. Through the windows, passengers could see another aircraft pulling alongside, close enough to make out its dark silhouette against the stars. Too close. Dangerously close. Screams erupted throughout the cabin. The Anderson twins started crying. Several passengers began praying aloud. The soldiers tensed, their hands instinctively reaching for weapons they didn't have. Naomi reached the cockpit door just as Reynolds was opening it to come out. "They're right beside us," he said, his professional calm cracking slightly. "They're trying to force us down." "Let me talk to them," Naomi said. "They're not responding. They'll respond to me." She pushed past him into the cockpit, grabbing the radio. She switched to guard frequency, the emergency channel that every aircraft monitored, and spoke clearly. "Grey Wing Flight. This is Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Walker. I know you're listening. Marcus, let's talk." The silence stretched for long seconds. Then a voice she hadn't heard in 5 years came through the speakers. Older, rougher, but unmistakably Marcus Webb. Well, Vixen herself. "I wondered if you were aboard when I saw the passenger manifest. Naomi Walker flying commercial. How the mighty have fallen." Peterson looked at her in shock. She knew these people. "Marcus, whatever you're being paid, it's not worth killing a plane full of innocent people," Naomi said. "Who said anything about killing anyone?" Marcus replied, and she could hear that familiar, cocky tone that had once made him the squadron's favorite and most frustrating pilot. "We just want your friend in 38F is carrying. Hand it over and everyone goes home safe." "You know I can't do that." "You mean you won't?" Still playing by the rules, even after they threw you away, even after they destroyed your career for doing the right thing. The words hit harder than she'd expected, but she kept her voice steady. "This isn't about me or you or what happened 5 years ago. This is about 200 innocent people. Everything's about what happened 5 years ago, Naomi. That's when we both learned what the rules are really worth. The aircraft outside pulled even closer, its wing lights filling the cockpit with alternating red and green flashes. Reynolds had to fight the instinct to bank away. At this altitude and speed, any sudden movement could be catastrophic. "Marcus, pull back," Naomi said into the radio, her voice carrying the authority she'd once wielded as a superior officer. "You're endangering everyone with this proximity. Negative, Vixen. You have something we need, and we're not leaving without it. You can either cooperate or things get uncomfortable for everyone aboard your flying bus." Through the cockpit windows, Naomi could see the modified fighter jet more clearly now. It was a civilian aircraft, but heavily modified. Probably an old L-39 Albatross or similar, the kind of military trainer that ended up on the civilian market after the Cold War. Fast, agile, and in the right hands, deadly. She turned to Reynolds. "How much fuel do we have?" "Enough to reach London with standard reserves. But if we have to start manoeuvring, we won't last long," she finished. "And he knows it." Back in the cabin, Jennifer was doing her best to maintain order, but it was a losing battle. The proximity of the other aircraft was visible to everyone on the starboard side, and word was spreading quickly to the rest of the passengers. The hooded man in 38F had gone completely rigid, his knuckles white as he clutched his bag. Crawford had moved closer, now sitting just across the aisle from him. "Whatever you're carrying," the ex-cop said quietly, "maybe it's time to consider giving it up. It's not worth all these lives." "You don't understand," the man hissed. "If they get these codes, they could crash satellites into cities, disabled defense networks, cause chaos you can't imagine. Thousands could die." "Thousands versus 200, Crawford said grimly. "That's the mathematics of it. That's exactly the mathematics of it." Margaret. Foster, who had been quietly praying, suddenly spoke up from her window seat. "That woman, Naomi, she'll figure something out. Did you see her eyes? She's done this before. Nobody's done this before." The hooded man said desperately, "This is unprecedented." But Margaret shook her head. "Maybe not this exactly, but that woman has faced death before in one. I can tell my late husband was military Navy pilot in Vietnam. He had the same look. The ones who survived the impossible things, they all had that look." In the cockpit, Naomi was rapidly running through scenarios. She knew Marcus's flying style, his tactics, his weaknesses. He'd always been aggressive, perhaps too aggressive. It had made him a formidable combat pilot, but also predictable in some ways. "Captain, I need you to start a gradual turn to heading 270, she said. "That takes us off course. Trust me, and reduce speed by 10 knots, very gradually." Reynolds exchanged glances with Peterson, but complied. The big aircraft began its slow adjustment. "What are you doing, Vixen?" Marcus's voice came over the radio. "Don't try to be clever." "Just looking for smoother air, Marcus," she replied calmly. "These passengers are scared enough without turbulence." But she was actually doing something else, positioning the aircraft so that the rising sun, still an hour from breaking the horizon, would eventually be directly behind them. It was a fighter pilot's tactic, using natural elements as weapons. Marcus would recognize it eventually, but by then she hoped to have another plan in motion. "I need to go back out there," she told Reynolds. "Keep him talking. Ask him about his aircraft, his fuel status, anything to keep him engaged. And whatever you do, don't descend below 20,000 feet." She left the cockpit and made her way directly to the hooded man. This time she didn't kneel beside him. She stood in the aisle where everyone could see her, projecting authority. "What's your real name?" she asked him. He hesitated. "Then Victor." "Victor Clov." "Victor, I need you to listen very carefully. The man on that plane out there, I know him. He's dangerous, but he's also predictable. We're going to get through this, but I need your help. What can I do? I'm just a courier. You can start by telling me everything about those codes. What systems do they control? How long are they valid? Is there a way to partially corrupt them so they be useless?" Victor's eyes widened slightly. There might be. The codes are encrypted in layers. If I delete certain segments, they'd look intact, but wouldn't function. But if they realize what I've done, they'll kill us all anyway, Naomi said bluntly. Marcus Webb doesn't leave witnesses. That's why he's perfect for this kind of work. The soldiers have been listening from their seats nearby. Sergeant Williams stood up, moving closer. "Ma'am, if you're military, we're at your disposal. We might not have weapons, but we've got training." Naomi assessed them quickly. Young, fit, alert. "I might need you for now. Help keep the other passengers calm. If things go bad, I need you ready to assist the flight crew with emergency procedures." "Yes, ma'am." She turned back to Victor. "Start working on those codes. Make it look like you're protecting them, but actually degrade them. Can you do that?" Victor nodded nervously, pulling out a small tablet from his bag. His fingers flew over the screen, entering passwords and navigating through layers of encryption. The plane suddenly banked sharply to the left, throwing everyone against their seats. Through the windows, passengers could see the hostile aircraft had moved to their port side now, even closer than before. Close enough that they could see the pilot, a figure in a dark helmet and oxygen mask, impossible to identify, but radiating menace through body language alone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reynolds' voice came over the intercom, strain evident despite his attempts to sound calm. "We're experiencing some traffic conflicts. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We should be through this shortly." But Naomi knew better. Marcus was escalating, pushing boundaries, seeing how far he could go. She'd seen him do this in training exercises. Probe, push, then strike when the opponent was off balance. She made her way back toward the cockpit, but stopped when she heard a commotion behind her. The accomplice, the quiet woman who had been sitting 2 rows behind her original seat, had stood up and was moving toward the mid-sea cabin door. Crawford was already moving to intercept, but the woman was faster than expected. "Nobody move!" the woman shouted, and Naomi saw the glint of metal in her hand. Not a gun that would have been detected, but what looked like a sharpened piece of metal, probably removed from something in the laboratory. The cabin erupted in fresh panic. Parents pulled children close. Several people ducked below their seats. The soldiers started to move, but Naomi held up a hand, stopping them. "What do you want?" Naomi asked calmly, turning to face the woman. "The codes," the woman said, her accent matching Victor's Eastern European, but trying to hide it. "Give me the codes and I open the door." They board. Take what they want and leave. Everyone lives. You open that door at this altitude and everyone dies. Naomi said, "Not if we descend first. Tell the captain to take us down to 10,000 feet. So that was the plan. Force them low enough for a boarding operation." Marcus had someone on the inside, someone who'd been waiting for the right moment. "You're assuming they'll keep their word," Naomi said, taking a slow step toward the woman. "You're assuming that once they have what they want, they'll just leave. But you don't know Marcus Webb like I do. Stay back." The woman waved the makeshift weapon. But Naomi kept coming slow and steady. He's going to kill everyone anyway. You mean Victor, all these innocent people? Because that's what he does now. That's what he became after. She stopped herself. After what? The woman demanded. After I failed to stop him the first time, Naomi said quietly. The confession hung in the air. Several passengers who were listening gasped. Even Crawford looked surprised. 5 years ago, Naomi continued, still moving slowly toward the woman. Marcus and I were on a mission, classified off the books. We were supposed to destroy a terrorist camp, but when we got there, we realized the intel was wrong. It was a refugee camp, families, children. I refused to engage. Marcus didn't. The woman's hand was shaking now, the weapon wavering. I tried to stop him, Naomi said. I damaged his aircraft, forced him to abort, but not before he dropped ordnance. 17 civilians died. The Air Force buried it, discharged me for insubordination and attacking a fellow officer, and Marcus disappeared. I thought he was in prison. I was wrong. She was close enough now. In one fluid motion, honed by years of combat training, she grabbed the woman's wrist, twisted, and the weapon clattered to the floor. Crawford was there immediately, restraining the woman with the practiced efficiency of 2 decades in law enforcement. Secure her in the back, Naomi told him. Use whatever you need to keep her contained. As Crawford dragged the accomplice away, Naomi picked up the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation is under control. Please remain calm and seated. But she knew it was far from under control. If anything, it was about to get much worse. Marcus played his inside card and lost. He wouldn't have a backup plan. He'd have 3. The radio in the cockpit crackled to life, and Marcus's voice filled the cabin through the open cockpit door. Nice work, Vixen. You always were good at close quarters. But this isn't close quarters anymore. You're in a flying brick and I'm going to fight her. Last chance. Give me the codes or I start putting holes in your fuselage. Naomi rushed to the cockpit. He's bluffing. He won't risk destroying the codes. You sure about that? Reynolds asked. Before she could answer, there was a bright flash outside and something streaked past the aircraft. Not a warning shot this time. It had come close enough that they heard the sonic crack of its passage. That wasn't a bluff, Peterson said, his voice tight with fear. Naomi grabbed the radio. Marcus, you fire on this aircraft, and those codes are gone forever. Victor's already set up a dead man's switch. Anything happens to us, the codes self-destruct. It was a lie, but a necessary one. She glanced back at Victor, who was watching her with wide eyes. She mouthed the word, play along, and he nodded quickly. You're lying, Marcus said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Am I? You know me, Marcus. You know I plan for contingencies. You taught me that. Remember, always have a backup plan. There was silence on the radio outside. The hostile aircraft had pulled back slightly, no longer dangerously close, but still shadowing them. Here's what's going to happen, Naomi said, taking control of the situation. We're going to continue to London. You're going to follow if you want, but you keep your distance. When we land, we can negotiate. But if you fire on this aircraft again, if you endanger these passengers, you get nothing. You don't give the orders anymore. Vixen, you're not a lieutenant colonel. You're nobody. Maybe, Naomi said, but I'm a nobody standing between you and what you want, and we both know I've stopped you before. The tension in the cockpit was suffocating. Reynolds and Peterson watched her, waiting to see if her gambit would work. Finally, Marcus spoke. You've got 1 hour, Naomi. 1 hour to convince me why I shouldn't just take what I want. And trust me, after what you cost me 5 years ago, I'm very motivated to see this end badly for you. The radio went silent. Outside, the hostile aircraft maintained its distance, but didn't leave. Naomi turned to Reynolds. We bought time, but not much. How far to friendly airspace at current speed? About 90 minutes. She closed her eyes, calculating. They needed to stretch that hour somehow. Needed to find a way to Munn interrupted. I'm getting something on the radio. Military frequency. Naomi grabbed the headset. Through the static, she heard a voice she recognized. Colonel James Harrison, her old commanding officer. Lieutenant Colonel Walker. This is Rampart. Actual. We've been monitoring your situation. Help us en route, but you need to buy us 30 minutes. Can you do that? 30 minutes against Marcus Webb, who knew all her tricks, all her tactics. Roger Rampart, we'll buy you 30 minutes. She handed the headset back and looked at Reynolds and Peterson. Gentlemen, we're about to do some flying that your manual definitely doesn't cover. Are you ready? Reynolds gripped the yoke tighter. We're with you, Colonel. She wasn't a colonel anymore, hadn't been for 5 years. But right now, with 200 lives hanging in the balance and her former wingman turned mercenary on their tail, she needed to be everything she once was and more. The 30-minute countdown had begun, and Naomi knew every second would matter. She stood in the cockpit doorway, her mind running combat scenarios while her eyes tracked the hostile aircraft, maintaining its threatening position off their starboard wing. Captain, I need you to gradually increase altitude, she said to Reynolds. Make it look like we're struggling with controls. Erratic, but controlled. That'll burn more fuel, Peterson protested. It'll also force Marcus to burn, his Naomi replied. That's not a long-range aircraft he's flying. He's already been shadowing us for over 2 hours. His fuel situation has to be getting critical. Reynolds began the maneuver, letting the aircraft drift upward in an uneven climb. Through the windows, they could see the hostile jet adjusting its position to match its movements, sharp and aggressive, where theirs were deliberately sluggish. Back in the cabin, the passengers were reaching their breaking point. The Anderson children had stopped crying, moving into that quiet, shocked state that worried their parents more than tears. Sarah Anderson held them close, whispering stories about brave knights and princesses, trying to transport them anywhere but here. Victor Clove was still working on his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen as he methodically corrupted segments of the satellite codes. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, knowing that if Marcus's people got their hands on his device before he finished, they'd realize what he was doing. Crawford, having secured the accomplice with zip ties from the aircraft's emergency kit, had positioned himself where he could watch both her and the main cabin. The woman sat sullenly, her eyes burning with frustration and fear in equal measure. You don't understand, she muttered to Crawford. When he doesn't get what he wants, he doesn't leave witnesses. We're all dead anyway. Then why help him? Crawford asked. Because if I helped, my family had a chance. Now she trailed off, looking out the window at the predatory aircraft beside them. Sergeant Williams approached Naomi as she returned from the cockpit. Ma'am, my men and we're ready for whatever you need. We might not have weapons, but we've got training. Naomi assessed him and his 3 companions. Young, eager, trained for ground combat, but trapped in an aerial chess match. Actually, Sergeant, I do have something you can do. I need you to organize the passengers. If we have to make emergency maneuvers, people need to be ready. Families with children in the middle rows away from windows. Anyone with medical conditions identified and monitored. Can you handle that? Yes, ma'am. Williams immediately began organizing his men, and they spread through the cabin with quiet efficiency, repositioning passengers without causing additional panic. The plane suddenly lurched harder than before. This time it wasn't turbulence or evasive maneuvering. Through the starboard windows, passengers screamed as they saw another aircraft approaching from below. A second hostile jet rising from the cloud layer like a shark from dark waters. Where the hell did that come from? Reynolds's voice crackled over the intercom, forgetting that passengers could hear him. Naomi was back in the cockpit in seconds. The new aircraft was identical to Marcus's another modified trainer jet. Her heart sank. Marcus had backup, which meant he'd been planning this for longer than she'd thought. Grey Wing 2 is in position. A new voice came over the radio. Female professional cold. You now have hostile aircraft on both flanks. Compliance is your only option. Naomi grabbed the radio. This is getting crowded up here. You're risking a mid-air collision. Only if you make sudden movements, Marcus replied, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. You taught me about force multiplication, remember? Always have superior numbers. She did remember. She drilled it into him during their training years. Never engage unless you have advantage. He learned his lessons well, maybe too well. Captain maintained steady flight. Naomi instructed Reynolds. No sudden movements, but start a very gradual descent. Make it look like we're complying, but you said not to go below. I know what I said. Trust me. She turned to Peterson. What's our current position? About 200 meters southwest of Ireland, heading northeast. Ireland. NATO airspace was close, but not close enough. The military help Colonel Harrison had promised was still 25 minutes out. They needed to buy more time. Naomi picked up the intercom, addressing the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lieutenant Colonel Walker. I need everyone to remain calm and follow the crew's instructions. Exactly. We're going to experience some unusual maneuvering in the next few minutes. This is necessary for your safety. She clicked off and turned to Reynolds. On my mark, I need you to deploy the speed brakes and drop the gear at this altitude. It'll create massive drag, drop our speed by nearly half instantly. The jets following us will overshoot. They'll have to circle back, and that buys us minutes. It could also tear the gear doors off, Peterson said. The 777 is overbuilt, Naomi replied. It can take it, I hope. Through the cockpit windows, she watched Marcus's aircraft. She knew him, knew his patterns. He'd been her wingman for 3 years. She taught him, mentored him, trusted him, and she knew that right now he was getting impatient. Marcus had always hated waiting. Vixen, you're stalling. His voice came over the radio. Start your descent now, or we start putting holes in your aircraft. We're descending, Naomi replied calmly. Check your instruments. They were but barely maybe 500 feet per minute. Hardly noticeable, but it would keep them occupied for a moment. In the cabin, Victor suddenly looked up from his tablet, his face pale. They're trying to hack in, he said to nobody in particular. Someone's attempting to access the codes remotely. Crawford, who had been listening, moved closer. Can they do that? Not if I disconnect from everything, Victor said, frantically typing. But if I do that, I can't finish corrupting the files. How much longer do you need? Crawford asked. 10 minutes, maybe 15. Crawford looked toward the cockpit, then made a decision. He pulled out his phone, which he kept in airplane mode, and turned it on. If they're trying to hack his device, maybe we can give them something else to focus on. He began turning on every electronic device he could find, asking nearby passengers to do the same. Turn on your phones, tablets, laptops, everything. Create electronic noise. Margaret Foster, who had been quietly observing everything, suddenly spoke up. I have a portable Wi-Fi router in my bag. My grandson insisted I carry it. Would that help? Yes, Crawford said, surprised. Turn it on. Set up a network. Make it visible. Within moments, dozens of devices were active, creating a fog of electronic signals. Victor's tablet became just one device among many, harder to isolate and target. The second hostile aircraft had moved closer, now visible from the portside windows. Passengers on both sides of the aircraft could see the predators flanking them, and the psychological effect was devastating. Several people were openly weeping. Others sat in shock silence, holding hands with strangers. 20 minutes until help arrives. Peterson whispered to Naomi, checking his instruments. 20 minutes in aerial combat. That was a lifetime. Entire battles were won and lost in less time. That's when Naomi noticed something. The second aircraft was flying differently than Marcus's, less aggressive, more mechanical. The pilot was good, but not exceptional, and there was something about the way it maintained position. Captain, look at the second aircraft, she said. Notice anything about its flight pattern? Reynolds studied it for a moment. It's very consistent. Same distance, same angle, like it's on autopilot, or like the pilot is inexperienced with formation flying, Naomi said. A plan began forming in her mind. I need to make an announcement. She took the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, in approximately 30 seconds, I need everyone to brace for impact. This is a precautionary measure. Flight attendants, secure positions. Jennifer Martinez's voice came over the cabin speaker. Brace positions. Everyone, heads down, feet flat on the floor. Parents pulled children close. The soldiers helped elderly passengers into proper positions. Crawford made sure the accomplice was secured. What are you doing? Reynolds asked nervously. Creating chaos, Naomi replied. She grabbed the radio. Marcus, we have a problem. We're losing hydraulic pressure, can't maintain altitude. It was a lie, but she sold it with just enough panic in her voice to be believable. Don't try to play games, Vixen, Marcus warned. No games, she said, then to Reynolds. Now.
These belong to someone who exemplifies what flying is really about, he said. Duty, courage, and bringing everyone home. I can't accept these. You can, and you will. In 30 years of flying, I've never seen anything like what you did today. You didn't just save our passengers. You saved aviation itself from becoming a weapon of terror. As Naomi finally descended the stairs to the tarmac, she found Colonel Harrison waiting with a secure phone. There's someone who wants to speak with you, he said. She took the phone, expecting some Pentagon official. Instead, she heard a young voice, tentative and grateful. Miss Walker, this is Amara Hassan. I was named after my aunt who died in Afghanistan 5 years ago. My family was told it was a terrorist attack, but we never believed it. Today watching the news, hearing what that man confessed. We finally know the truth and we know you try to stop it. Thank you for trying. Thank you for not forgetting. Naomi couldn't speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the unexpected closure of circle she thought would never complete. I'm sorry I couldn't save her, she finally managed. But you saved 200 others today. Maya will be proud. We all are. After the call ended, Naomi stood on the tarmac, watching the sunrise paint the Irish sky. In the distance, she could see Marcus being loaded into a secure transport, heading toward justice long delayed. The passengers were being processed in the terminal, their stories already becoming legend. And somewhere in offices in Washington and London and Beijing, officials were scrambling to understand how close the world had come to disaster. So Harrison said, standing beside her, ready to come back? The Air Force needs you, Naomi. Today proved that. Naomi thought about the offer. Full reinstatement, vindication, a chance to train the next generation. Then she looked at the 777 that had carried them through the night, battered but unbroken, and at the crew preparing it for its eventual continuation to London. Yes, she said simply, but on one condition, name it. We create a civilian-military liaison program. Commercial pilots train for these scenarios. Military pilots who understand civilian aviation. No more separation between the two worlds. Today showed that threats don't distinguish between military and civilian targets. Harrison smiled. Already thought of that. We're calling it the Walker Protocol. You'll head it up. The Walker Protocol. From disgraced officer to the name on a new defensive doctrine. Life had a strange way of balancing the scales. As the emergency vehicles began to disperse and normal operations slowly resumed at Shannon Airport, Naomi took one last look at the plane that had been their battlefield and refuge. In a few hours, it would be swarmed by investigators and engineers, its every system analyzed, its story documented in minute detail. But for now, it stood as a monument to what ordinary people could do when pushed to extraordinary circumstances. A testament to courage found in unexpected places. In a grandmother with a Wi-Fi router, an 8-year-old with a music app, a ex-cop who refused to stand idle. Soldiers without weapons who still stood guard. And a pilot who'd lost everything finding redemption in the sky. Ready to go? Harrison asked. There's a transport waiting to take you to London. Then Washington. One more thing, Naomi said. She walked over to where Marcus was being held, the guards tensing as she approached. Marcus looked up at her, his face a map of regret and resignation. Come to gloat. No. Come to say that I'll testify at your trial. Not against you. For you. You stopped when it mattered. That has to count for something. It doesn't erase what I did. No, but maybe it's a start. She turned to walk away, then paused. That maneuver you pulled, the inverted pass. You telegraphed it. You're still favoring that shoulder. Despite everything, Marcus actually smiled. And you still see everything, don't you? Some things never change. Some things do, Naomi replied. We're proof of that. As she walked back to Harrison and the waiting transport, Naomi felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Peace. Not complete, not perfect, but real. The ghosts of 17 civilians would always be with her. But now they were joined by the living presence of 200 others who would go home to their families because when it mattered most, everyone involved had chosen life over death, courage over fear, and ultimately redemption over revenge. The transport flight to London gave Naomi 3 hours to process everything that had happened. She sat in the military aircraft's sparse cabin, Colonel Harrison across from her. Both of them silent as Ireland fell away below. The adrenaline was finally fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the weight of decisions made in split seconds that would be analyzed for years. There's something you should know, Harrison finally said, breaking the silence. The Chinese detected the satellite anomaly. Their bird went offline for 17 seconds before Marcus drones were neutralized. They thought it was an attack. Naomi's stomach dropped. How close did we come? Their strategic forces went to elevated readiness. Another few minutes and they would have initiated countermeasures. We literally prevented World War II at 30,000 feet. The magnitude of it was almost incomprehensible. What had started as one man's revenge plot had nearly triggered global catastrophe. All because of a mission 5 years ago that should never have happened. The families of those 17 civilians, Naomi said quietly. Have they all been notified about what really happened? Harrison nodded. The Pentagon is reaching out to each one personally. With Marcus' confession, we can finally give them the truth. It won't bring their loved ones back, but at least they'll have answers. Through the window, London was approaching. The Thames winding through the city like a silver ribbon. Somewhere down there, Flight 447's passengers were being processed, their statements taken, their lives forever changed by night. They'd never forget. The president wants to award you the Medal of Honor, Harrison said. No. Naomi replied immediately. I don't want medals. I just want to make sure this never happens again. The Walker Protocol, it's bigger than that. Marcus wasn't created in a vacuum. The system that covered up those civilian deaths, that discharged me for trying to stop them, that let him disappear into the private military world. That system is still in place. Harrison's expression darkened. You're talking about major reforms. I'm talking about accountability, real oversight. No more black ops that can go wrong with no consequences. No more scapegoating the people who try to do the right thing. That's going to make you enemies, powerful ones. Then I'll need powerful allies, Naomi said, meeting his eyes. Starting with you. The landing at RAF Halt was deliberately low-key. Away from the media circus at Heathrow, where Flight 447's passengers were giving their accounts to a hungry press. A convoy of black vehicles waited on the tarmac, ready to take them to the emergency cabinet office briefing room, where British and American officials were gathering. But first, there was someone else waiting. As Naomi descended the aircraft stairs, she saw a familiar figure standing by one of the vehicles. Jennifer Martinez, still in her flight attendant uniform, looking exhausted but determined. "I had to see you before you disappeared into meetings," Jennifer said. "The passengers, we've been talking, everyone from the flight. We want to testify publicly if necessary about what you did. Margaret Foster is already organizing everyone, getting contact information, making sure our stories are heard." "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is," Jennifer interrupted. "You saved us. But more than that, you showed us what courage looks like, what doing the right thing looks like, even when it costs you everything. We're not going to let them bury this or spin it or classify it into obscurity." She handed Naomi an envelope, email addresses, phone numbers, social media handles, 200 witnesses to what happened up there. 200 people who owe you their lives and won't forget it. The meeting at the cabinet office was a blur of uniforms and suits, British accents mixing with American. Everyone trying to understand how a commercial flight had become the center of an international incident. Naomi recounted the events with military precision, answered questions from intelligence officials, defense ministers, and aviation authorities. But her mind kept drifting to Marcus, sitting in a cell somewhere in Ireland, facing the consequences of choices made in anger and pain. They'd been so similar once. Two of the Air Force's best, dedicated to duty and honor. One split-second decision in the skies over Afghanistan had sent them on diverging path that had finally intersected again over the Atlantic. Colonel Walker, the British Defense Secretary, was saying, "Your actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic international incident. The United Kingdom owes you a debt of gratitude. With respect, sir, I had help." The crew of Flight 447, the passengers, even Marcus Webb in the end, everyone played a part. This wasn't a military operation. It was civilians and military working together using whatever they had available from coffee makers to children's toys. "That's the lesson here." The American Secretary of Defense leaned forward, "Which brings us to your proposal, the Walker Protocol. Tell us more." For the next hour, Naomi outlined her vision. Commercial pilots trained in basic defensive tactics, military liaison at major airports, rapid response protocols that didn't rely on shooting down hijacked aircraft, technology to counter drones and electronic intrusions. Most importantly, a system where civilian and military aviation worked together instead of in separate silos. The swagger and confidence that had defined him stripped away, leaving only a tired man facing the weight of his crimes. "You came," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I said I would testify. I keep my promises." They sat across from each other at a metal table. Guards watching from the corners, cameras recording everything. "Why did you really stand down?" Naomi asked. "It wasn't just my speech or Harrison's order. You had us. You could have completed your mission." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember that kid in Kandahar? The one who used to sell us fruit outside the base?" Acmed. He was 12, 13. He'd had a birthday the week before it happened. His sister Amara was one of the 17. Marcus's voice cracked. "When I saw those families on the plane, those kids the same age as the ones, I couldn't do it again. I couldn't be responsible for more children growing up without parents, more parents losing children. The satellite attack would have killed thousands. I know I told myself it was different, that it was military targets, that the chaos would lead to changes, accountability. But watching you protect those people, seeing that family with the twins, I realized I become the monster I claimed to be fighting against." "You were angry. Pain makes us do terrible things. You were angry, too. They destroyed your career. Took away everything you'd worked for. But you didn't become me. I had better friends," Naomi said simply. "People who reminded me who I was, even when the Air Force tried to erase me. You isolated yourself. Let the anger fester. And now you face justice. Real justice. Not the cover-up we got 5 years ago. Your confession will be public. The families will have their day in court. And maybe, just maybe, the system that created us both will finally change." Marcus nodded slowly. "The Walker Protocol. I heard about it. It's good. It's what we should have had from the beginning. It's a start." As she stood to leave, Marcus called out, "Naomi, that family, the ones with the twins, tell them. Tell them I'm sorry for everything." A week later, Naomi stood before the Senate Armed Services Committee in Washington. The room packed with media, military officials, and most importantly, several passengers from Flight 447 who had flown in to support her. Senator Patricia Williams, the committee chair, began the hearing. "Colonel Walker, you've been called here to discuss the events of Flight 447 and your proposed Walker Protocol. But first, this committee owes you an apology. 5 years ago, you were wrongfully discharged for trying to prevent a war crime. That was a failure of leadership at every level. Effective immediately, your record has been cleared, your rank restored, and back pay authorized." The gallery erupted in applause. Naomi saw Margaret Foster in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The Anderson family was there, too. The twins wearing matching Colonel Walker is our hero t-shirts that someone had made. "Thank you, Senator. But I'm not here for vindication. I'm here to make sure no one else goes through what those passengers experienced. What those 17 civilians in Afghanistan experienced. What Major Webb experienced when the system abandoned him to his worst impulses." Over the next 3 hours, she testified about the flight, the failures that had led to it, and the solutions the Walker Protocol would provide. She was followed by Captain Reynolds, who spoke eloquently about the need for better coordination between civilian and military aviation. Then, Victor Clav under immunity detailed how easily civilian aircraft could be targeted by those with the right knowledge and tools. But the most powerful testimony came from Sarah Anderson. "My children asked me if the bad man on the plane was going to hurt us." She said, her voice steady despite visible emotion. "I didn't know what to tell them. But then Colonel Walker stood up, and even though I didn't know who she was, I knew we were going to be okay because she had that look. The look of someone who would die before letting harm come to innocence. That's the kind of person we need protecting our skies. That's the kind of protocol we need in place." The committee voted unanimously to fund the Walker Protocol. 6 months later, Naomi stood in a simulator at the newly established Joint Aviation Defense Center in Colorado. Around her, commercial pilots were learning basic threat assessment while Air Force pilots practiced coordination with civilian air traffic control. It was the first class of what would become a standard part of aviation training worldwide. "The key," she told a mixed group of civilian and military pilots, "is to remember that up there, we're all on the same side. The threats we face don't care about the insignia on our wings or the company on our fuselage. We protect each other, and we protect those who trust us to bring them home safely." In the back of the room, she noticed a familiar face. Jennifer Martinez had left commercial flying to become one of the protocol's first instructor coordinators, teaching flight crews how to handle extraordinary situations with ordinary tools. After the session, they walked together through the facility past walls lined with photos from Flight 447, not glorifying the danger, but honoring the cooperation that had saved lives. "Any regrets?" Jennifer asked. "You could have had any position in the Air Force. Full reinstatement, choice of commands. Instead, you're here teaching." "This is where I need to be," Naomi replied. "Every pilot we train, every crew we prepare, every protocol we establish. It's prevention. It's making sure there's never another Marcus Webb, never another Flight 447. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Margaret Foster, who had become an unlikely friend and correspondent. The older woman had written a book about the experience, with all proceeds going to a fund for the families of the Afghan civilians killed 5 years ago. The message was simple. "First copy off the press dedicated to the woman who taught us all how to fly without wings." Another message followed this one from an official source. Marcus Webb had been sentenced to 25 years with the possibility of parole in 15. He provided extensive information about the private military world, leading to dozens of arrests and the dismantling of several mercenary organizations. From prison, he'd started corresponding with the families of his victims, beginning a long journey toward whatever redemption might be possible. That evening, Naomi stood on the observation deck of the center, watching planes crisscross the Colorado sky. Commercial flights, military aircraft, all sharing the same airspace, all part of the same system. Now, Colonel Harrison joined her. Now, a general and director of the entire program. The Chinese want to implement the protocol. So, do the Europeans, the Russians, even we started on that flight? It's going global. Good. The threats are global. The response should be too. There's something else. The president has scheduled the Medal of Honor ceremony. "I know you said you didn't want it, but I'll accept it," Naomi interrupted. "But only if the entire crew of Flight 447 is there. And the passengers. This isn't my medal. It's ours." 3 weeks later, in the Rose Garden of the White House, Naomi stood as the president placed the medal around her neck. But the real moment came after, when 200 people, passengers and crew from Flight 447, stood as one to applaud not just her, but each other. Their shared experience of terror transformed into triumph. Young Emma Anderson broke from the crowd and ran to Naomi, hugging her legs tightly. "Are you still not a superhero?" she asked, looking up with bright eyes. Naomi knelt down to the girl's level, the medal heavy around her neck. "No, it's with you. But you know what I learned? We don't need superheroes. We just need regular people who are brave when it matters." As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Naomi noticed someone standing at the edge of the gathering. A young woman in Air Force dress uniform, fresh from the academy, waiting nervously to approach. Kiran'll walk, I am Lieutenant Sakin. I'm your first official student in the Walker Protocol Advanced Program. I joined the Air Force because of what you did. Because you showed that doing the right thing matters more than following the wrong orders. Looking at this young officer, Naomi saw herself 10 years ago. Idealistic, determined, ready to serve. But this lieutenant would enter a different Air Force, one changed by the hard lessons of Flight 447 and the 17 who died before. Welcome to the program, Lieutenant. Ready to learn how to protect the sky? Yes, ma'am. Ready. As the sun set over Washington, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Naomi Walker stood surrounded by the lives she'd saved and the future she was building. The woman who had boarded Flight 447 as a sleeping passenger had awakened to become the guardian of a new era in aviation security. The threats would continue to evolve. New dangers would emerge. But now there was a protocol, a system, a network of trained individuals ready to respond. The Walker Protocol wasn't just about tactics and training. It was about the fundamental belief that when crisis comes, ordinary people can do extraordinary things. And somewhere in a small apartment in London, Margaret Foster was writing the epilogue to her book, ending with words that would become the unofficial motto of the Walker Protocol. In the sky, we are all connected. In danger, we are all family. In courage, we are all capable of flight. If you had the skills to save hundreds of lives, but using them meant confronting the darkest failure of your past, would you step forward or stay silent? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances.